used to have these slogans on the buildings outside saying the USSR is the best or something like this. There was a law against idleness. Well, propaganda is a very strong word, more of a message. All of us had this little star, a red star on our uniform with a little Lenin's face. So we were trying to be like him. He was our example. I thought that I truly loved Lenin as a person with all my heart. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Some of you might know me and some of you might not. My name is Olga. I live in the northwest of England in a city called Preston, but I come from Russia. And even though this channel is all about fell running, trail running and hiking, I wanted to make this video about growing up in Soviet Union. I thought it might be interesting to share this with you. This is going to be only my personal perspective, and not all Russian people could have had similar experience, because a lot of our circumstances mostly depend on the family we grow up in. There are a lot of factors that shape our life experiences, and not just the country we get raised in. I was born in the USSR, the Union of Soviet Social Republics, and I lived in St. Petersburg, formerly known as Leningrad, until the age of 20, when I immigrated to England. The Soviet Union consisted of 15 republics, which are all separate countries now. When the Soviet Union collapsed in December of 1991, I was already 12 years old, so I have a very good memory of my childhood and teenage years. I can remember things clearly and with conscious understanding. I can remember my early life so much better than I remember my life 5 years ago. Anyway, when I was little, and when the grown-ups were asking me who I wanted to be when I would grow up, I always answered that I wanted to be the leader of the Communist Party. I wanted to be the General Secretary of the Communist Party, like Gorbachev, or like Lenin used to be. I was a weird child. Alongside with playing with dolls, I was playing being a party leader. It's all because my grandma was in the party, and I think in those days, to have a certain profession, you had to be in the party. So my grandma used to be a deputy head of a school, so she had to belong to the Communist Party. So every so often, she had to go to these meetings of the party, and she used to take me with me. I remember being 5 years old and being so proud that I am sitting there with the adults listening to the very important, serious adult conversations. I had a little notebook where I was writing my things down. I didn't know what I was writing. I was pretending there, but this was my game. I was playing being a party leader. In 1986, when I was 7 years old, I started school. In Russia, children start school at the age of 7. Quite often before that, children learn to read and write a little bit with their parents or in kindergarten. It's easy to learn to read in Russian because the Russian language is pretty phonetical, and once you've learned all the letters and what sounds they make, then you can start putting them together in words and pretty much start reading straight away. 1986 was a significant year in Soviet history. It was the year when Mikhail Gorbachev, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, who later became the first and the last president of the USSR, met with American President Ronald Reagan and the British Prime Minister at the time, Margaret Thatcher. I vividly remember being at the doctor's waiting room at the time, when everyone there were watching the summit of the two world leaders on TV. I remember feeling such joy that I couldn't describe. I must have been picking up the vibes in the room. I couldn't explain it at the time why, but even as a child, I really respected and admired Gorbachev. During the Soviet years, we had continuous propaganda. Well, propaganda is a very strong word, more of a message that the Soviet Union was the best country in the world. We used to have these slogans on the buildings outside saying the USSR is the best or something like this. And also, I guess we were a little bit brainwashed as children, but it was done very subtly, so you wouldn't even notice. For example, when I went to school, the books we were reading were about Lenin's life when he was a child. How great he was, how organized he was, what a good boy he was, that he used to come home from school and do his homework straight away. And I wanted to be like him. I wanted to do what Lenin used to do when he was a child. All of us had this little star, a red star on our uniform with a little Lenin's face. So we were trying to be like him. He was our example. I thought that I truly loved Lenin as a person with all my heart. I believed it with all my heart when I was a child that I loved him. In the Soviet Union, children had to learn how to be independent from the age of 7 when they went to school. You see, parents had to work, and there was even a law against idleness. So you would be prosecuted if you were out of work for longer than 4 months, especially if you lived in Moscow or Leningrad. Those people were caught and then sent to work far away in isolated regions for 5 years for the benefits of the society. Such people could be poets, for example, or artists. A lot of them were sent away to work hard for the society's benefits. So my mum and dad had to work, and we had to basically fend for ourselves. Well, we weren't really feral children, but we had to learn how to warm up our food, how to tell time, how to be at certain places at the correct time, because my mum signed me up to do cross-country skiing, and the cross-country club training was straight after school, 3 times a week. So I had to really quickly learn how to tell when my training would start. The good thing about everyone having to work was that the government provided free childcare for everyone from really, really early age, probably nearly from birth. But that meant that you were institutionalized from the early age. My parents met at university in Leningrad, and they were studying at, this place is called now, St. Petersburg University of Aerospace Instrumentation. So basically they became aeroplane engineers. At their university there was a mountaineering club which my mum and dad attended. They became really passionate about mountains in Russia. Well, in those days it was still USSR, but nowadays the countries where the mountains are Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. The mountains were called Pamir Range Mountains, and Tian Shan. Tian Shan is in Kyrgyzstan. There was a deficit of a lot of basic things in those days. That's why a lot of people used to make their own clothes. A lot of women used to sew dresses, anything you would wear, they could sew. I was taught to sew at school as well. But my dad even used to sew a sleeping bag to go in the mountains, and he used to weld his own crampons to put on his boots, on his mountain boots. So they were quite skilled, they could make their own things. My dad became a very keen mountaineer. He even stopped going on holiday with us. He was taking all his holidays to hike the mountains. My mum was really worried about him because obviously it was dangerous. She knew some people who died. Once he luckily managed to escape near-death experience when his partner, who he was tied up to, slipped and they started falling off a cliff. But last minute my dad managed to hook them up with an ice axe. That night my mum had a premonition dream about my dad coming home and putting his head into the window of the house from the outside like that and saying, "Help me." She was really spooked. Straight away she sent him a telegram trying to find out what had happened. My parents were the ones who introduced me to the mountains. St. Petersburg is very flat, and up until the age of 9 or 10 I hadn't even imagined what it would feel like to see a landscape which was not flat. And although St. Petersburg was a beautiful cultural city, when I first saw the mountains of Tian Shan in Kyrgyzia, my heart elevated straight up to heaven. I fell in love with the hiking world forever. I understood then why my dad was so obsessed with them too. My first time mountain hiking with my family was tough, but breathtaking experience. We stayed in the mountains for a few days, carrying all our own resources, tent, sleeping bags, food. I had altitude sickness at first too. When we had to go back home and leave the welcoming Kyrgyzia, I was crying so hard it felt as if I lost someone I loved. Summer holidays in Russia for the children last 3 months, June, July and August, and it's quite a long time for the children to be not occupied with specific activities. That's why in the Soviet times there used to be summer camps. Summer camps are places where you could send your children so they can spend their summer holidays there. They were brilliant places with lots of activities. I used to go there nearly every summer. Some other children had an alternative of going to their babushkas, their grandmas who lived in rural areas. Well, I couldn't do that because my grandma lived with us in the city. She lived in St. Petersburg with us. Not St. Petersburg, Leningrad at the time. I always used to wonder what it would be like to have a babushka in a rural area, in some isolated village, because my friends were always telling fun stories about spending their summers there. However, I too had a great time in summer camps. We had so many different activities, and they were in wonderful places near the sea, near Baltic Sea, the Gulf of Finland, and there was a nice forest near there as well. I loved going there. It was a really welcome break from the big city. I loved the nature, and they just let us roam around free. I loved that best of all. I think summer camps were not exactly free, but you only had to pay a little bit of money, and every organization provided those type of services for the children of people who worked there. My parents told me that when they were at university, they had certain people there who they knew were informers. Well, nobody's supposed to know that they were informers, but people were working that out. So if they heard something that they didn't like, which was against the party's ideology, they would inform this to the party's committee, and that student would disappear and nobody would be able to contact them. Well, that's what my mum and dad told me. I don't know if it's true or not, but I can believe that it might be true. So everyone was trying to watch what they were saying around other people. I mustn't forget to mention about our dacha. A lot of people in Soviet Union lived in block of flats, and if you lived in the city in a block of flat, then you didn't really have access to the countryside very often. That's why a lot of people had their little country houses. Well, it sounds very posh, but it's not that posh. Little houses outside of the city, which were called dacha, and around the house you would have a garden where you would grow vegetables, fruit, so basically anything you would want to grow berries, flowers, potatoes, everything to feed yourself. I loved it where our dacha was because it was near the Gulf of Finland, which was leading to Baltic Sea, and there was a forest around there as well. I always loved roaming around there. However, my sister and I were often asked to help with the garden, with weeding the vegetables, picking things, and sometimes it would take quite a long time because we had massive fields, I would call them fields, of potatoes and strawberries, carrots, anything you can imagine. I can tell any plant just by looking at its leaf. And I'm not really passionate about horticulture. It's just because I happened to grow up doing it. That's why I know about it. But I remember thinking back then that why do we need so much food to grow? I think my parents were worried about that there might be times where we will be struggling for food. So they were just trying their best to grow their own food for us. We used to preserve a lot of fruits and vegetables in jars. We used to pickle them, make jams out of them. We had shelves and shelves on our balcony full of them. Sometimes we wouldn't even go through them in 1 year time, but you could keep them for a long time. And then in 1991, Soviet Union collapsed and the wild 90s came. The times were really tough. There was a deficit of a lot of essential things. Food, toilet paper, soap. So having some meat and cheese became a luxury. My parents tried their best to make sure that we always have something to eat. I always felt happy during my childhood. And even though the times were hard during 1990s in Russia, my childhood memories are the ones that I treasure the most, growing up in the Soviet Union.